Group 2, Team Australia DTL Power, will provide an overview of cyber risk assessment. In this overview, we will outline risk assessment, attack vectors, vulnerabilities and threats, authentication, authorization, and access control, security standard, and mitigation recommendations or remediations.
DTL Power will now assess the organizational impact of the identified threats and prioritize the allocation of resources for the nation of Australia through an assessment and vulnerability matrix. The vulnerabilities within the matrix are assessed according to the severity of the threats impacting on an organization. High impact entails major, long-standing issues affecting all employees, clients, operating systems, and IT infrastructures within an organization when becoming victimized by the correlating vulnerability listed within the matrix. Medium impact suggests the vulnerability will not affect every single employee and/or client associated within an organization, like the high-rated impacts, but nonetheless, system outages and issues arising from vulnerabilities of this impact are to be mitigated with haste to protect an organization from worsening its situations. Lastly, low-impact vulnerabilities have a more lenient time frame when it comes to the mitigating process, for these threats do not pose an imminent threat in obtaining direct access into an organization's systems. All vulnerabilities should be addressed when they arise, for even threats that come with a low impact rate that technically do not pose an immediate risk to an organization could be forgotten and lead to more impactful threats. The nation of Australia has fallen victim to an intrusion attack. When potential scenarios like this become a reality, it further justifies the importance of identifying all potential attack vectors in order to evaluate the level of harm said attacks can have on a nation's infrastructure, so that in turn, security professionals can set the appropriate configurations in place to avoid a repeating attack. The overall means and/or pathways that malicious threat actors use to ultimately gain overall access into a network and/or a computer is an attack vector. These system entrances have security gaps that allow said actors a chance to exploit vulnerabilities into the systems of an organization after they have successfully gained entry through said security holes. Attack vectors are strategically placed with malicious intent due to them being a factor of deliberate human involvement. Each threat actor has a motive and strategy to sustain the life of the attack itself and retrieve what is of that actor's desire. There are several types of commonly known threat actors that are known for wanting to cause havoc, and they are as follows: hacktivists, terrorists, angry employees, cybercriminals of multiple offenses, opposing competitive organizations, and governments. In the figure pictured below, you will see the defining terms of multiple attack vectors that a vulnerability is exploited.
Vulnerabilities typically gauge how protected an organization is. Vulnerabilities can be used to generate a threat. Security procedures, design, and implementation can be used to exploit flaws or weaknesses in a system. Threats can be accidental, usually by an employee making a mistake or who is not trained correctly, or malicious, usually by a disgruntled employee or hacker motivated by money. The three factors that influence vulnerability are criticality, exposure, and time. Threats are an expression of intention to inflict evil, injury, or damage. Attacks against key security services like confidentiality, integrity, and availability. The operationalization of vulnerability, expected impact of a developing hazard, and the probability that impact will work against your vulnerabilities. Threat means something bad is coming your way. High threat means it is highly likely to hit you and it will be very bad. The main sources of threats are hackers, usually through social engineering, terrorists, through a system attack, and an insider with malicious code. Authentication, authorization, and access control are distinct functions. Authentication is the method of providing identity. Authorization determines that the proven identity has some set of characteristics associated with it that gives it the right to access the requested resources. Access control is the method of establishing the subject's identity, whether it be user, program, or process. Authentication is something a person is, has, or does. Biometrics, passwords, passphrases, tokens, or other private information are typically the methods used to authenticate. Strong authentication is important. To be properly authenticated, the subject is usually required to provide a second piece to the credential set: password, passphrase, a key, PIN, or token. When granting access rights to subjects, it should be based on the level of trust a company has in that subject and the subject's need to know. It is a core component of every operating system and established whether a user is authorized to access a particular resource and what action he or she is permitted to perform on that resource. The use of username or other public information is used to establish a subject's identity. They must also know the identification component requirements. When using access control values to users, the following should be considered. Each value should be unique for user accountability. A standard naming convention should be followed. The value should be non-descriptive of the user's position or task.
Standards. There are a few security standards out there to help security professionals basically improve their security posture as far as systems, networks, and communication. A few that are very known to the cybersecurity industry are the NIST 853 document, the CIS Computers for Internet Security Standards, and the PCI DSS Payment Card Industry Data Security Standards. Basically, each one of these standards allows a security professional to basically secure their network to that specific standard or whatever industry that is. So examples are stores that basically use credit card information. They would fall under the PCI DSS standard, so they would probably refer to that framework compared to a government agency or something like that that may just use the NIST 553 document and basically use some of those controls to basically remediate and mitigate any findings. After a vulnerability assessment has been done and findings have been apparent, the best way to go about this to remediate or mitigate any findings is to basically tie that to a specific security control of a specific framework. For this example, we're going to dive into the NIST 553 document, and we're basically going to assume that we found a issue with privilege escalation. So with that being said, one of the ways to basically mitigate unauthorized privileges is to basically practice the least functionality technique. So if it is a specific account for a server or service, we would want that account to basically have the bare minimum access or rights to that specific host or application, unless they have the authorized admin account or the proper authority to basically do admin type of work on that system or application. So with this being said, you see here, we see control CM-7, which is for the least functionality family. So it basically goes into some ways you can start to apply this policy as a technical aspect to the whole. So this does tie into both the policy and procedures to, along with the technical side as well.